everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, September 15th, 2025, and I'm the host of the show, Dr. Cara Santamaria. This week's episode is episode 568. We're in our 11th year, and the way I keep this show going, as you know, is by relying on the support of individuals just like you. Talk Nerdy is free to download. We do not charge for you to listen to the show, but we do still have to make our payments. I've got to pay my editor. I've got to pay my assistant/producer. I've got to make sure that my time is compensated. And also things like web hosting. Like, it's not free to just post a podcast on the internet. So how do we do that? Well, we use the PBS NPR model that we all know and love. If you are in a position where you can support the show on an episodic basis, you're then offsetting that cost so that, folks who can't afford to support the show don't have to, and they can still listen for free. So if you're interested in learning more, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com/talknerdy. This week's top patrons include Anu Bhadavaj, Chuck Blell, Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Joseph Lamore, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, and Ulrika Hagman. Thank you all so much. All right, so what have we got for you today? Ooh, it's a good one. I had the opportunity once again to chat with my favorite living science writer. I say that later on the show, but it's true. It's so true. She's the author of Stiff, Spook, Bonk, Packing for Mars, Gulp, Grunt, and Fuzz, and she has a new book out. It's called Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy. So without any further ado, here she is, Mary Roach. Well, Mary, it's always an honor to chat with you. I say this honestly, that you are my favorite living science writer.
I love that. I want to know who your favorite dead science writer is.
That would be Oliver Sacks.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's stiff competition right there. He's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that I know I am not alone in this. It's not uncommon that I will have folks on the show who have a voice that is really authentic and kind of funny, or like bitingly funny sometimes, yet still really respectful and humanistic. And when I say, I was reading your book, or I was looking at this passage and it kind of reminded me of Mary Roach, they're always like, oh my God, what an honor, what an honor.
Oh, that's so nice.
And so you've written several books. You have a new one out, Replaceable You. What number is this now?
This is number 8.
8. Wow. Okay.
I know. And that's not counting. There's a collection of my old humor columns in Reader's Digest, which very few people ever see because it's only sold by Reader's Digest because they owned the rights. So that one doesn't even appear. But I guess you could call that a book, but mostly 8. Let's go with 8.
Did you also, or am I mixing this up? Did you also edit like a Best American Science Writing volume?
I did.
I thought so.
I did. Yeah, that was really fun. Yeah.
I love those books. They're so great.
Yeah, they're so great, and it's just such a joy to edit one of those, because you discover these writers that have been out there doing their thing for publications that you just don't have time to check into, and you're like, wow, this person's really good.
Honestly, that's why I love doing a podcast like this, because there are so many brilliant writers out there. There's so much rich content to get through. We'll never be able to read it all, right? We'll always have huge gaps in our knowledge and our understanding, just because there's so much to get through. And yet we're living in a culture now. I mean, I just covered this on the other podcast I work on, where college professors are largely reporting that they have students coming into their freshman level classes having never read a whole book in high school.
I've heard that. And I've heard that professors are not assigning whole books for that reason, that it's more than the attention span can hold. Well, I don't know, but that was kind of sad for me to see, just because I'm just somebody who loves to sink into a book and have that feeling of like, go away, don't bother me, I'm reading.
I'm the same way. I love reading a book and really immersing myself in it. What I don't love, though, and this is something I've been talking to my editor about lately, or actually, even before my editor, my agent about lately, is I have yet to write my book because I love to have written. But I really struggle with the act of writing. But for somebody who's written as many volumes as you have, I'm curious, do you really enjoy sitting down and doing the work and writing the book, or is it also a huge slog for you?
It completely depends on how well the research has gone.
Mm.
If I have gone somewhere and witnessed and experienced really interesting, fun things, and brought these experiences and facts and things back and created this pile of material, it's actually very fun for me to get it down on the page. On the other hand, if I don't have a particularly good experience, or I feel like the material is a little flat and I'm kind of flogging the dead horse, I
Mm.
don't enjoy that. That's a struggle. And I have to think, do I just skip this chapter? Do I try to breathe life into it? What do I do? So that's not fun. But so really, it's just up to me to get myself into scenarios and labs and places where I'm going to have really interesting material that's going to be fun to write up. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I can imagine that a fair amount of that has to do with the subject matter itself, but I can also imagine that a big proportion of that is just I don't know, the personalities of the people that you have the opportunity
Yeah.
to meet when you're doing your reporting.
Oh, 100%. It does. And I don't know till I get there what that personality is going to be. All I know about this person is based on a couple emails back and forth, me going, that sounds interesting. Could I come to your lab or your facility or wherever I'm going? And then I get there, and it's just sort of luck of the draw. Fortunately, the kind of person who says yes to me, like, yes, you can come follow me around like a puppy for 2 days, ask me all kinds of simplistic questions, and I'm fine with that. That kind of person's usually pretty great to hang out with. And I am able to get a sense of their work from what I can find online and what I'm able to dig up. So I have a pretty good chance of hitting something that's going to be pretty interesting. But the personality is just, it's kind of a wild card, which I enjoy. I enjoy getting there and realizing, oh, this person is, and they're all over the map. Some of them are
Hmm.
deeply immersed in something really obscure and not necessarily, a charismatic, chatty person, but just so lovely because of their passion for this very specific, like this guy in the Netherlands who studies the mechanics of chewing food, and he studied it for decades and he had all this equipment, and I was just so delighted to spend a day with him. And so it's all over the map, but it's really rare that I go somewhere and realize, you know what, this is not coming to life at all. And sometimes
Yeah.
there have been times, mostly working for magazines, where I've just had to kind of back out. I just don't have anything to work with.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so curious about your process, and I'm probably going to focus on
Yeah,
that a little bit
great.
here at the top. But you've been doing this for a long time, and you are a well-known science writer at this point. I can imagine that, scientists, I know them, I love them, I am one, my friends are scientists, we're a weird bunch. I can imagine that some of the folks that you go interview just never get outside of their own field, don't read,
Yeah.
trade publications at all, or are, steeped just in the literature and maybe haven't read your work. But that a fair amount of them probably have. Do you think it's been easier or more difficult to get into labs having done this for a long time now? Because I say this with the caveat that a lot of scientists have a fear around talking to journalists, reporters, writers, because they have a fear of being misrepresented, taken out of context, their work
Yes.
being, described in a way that they don't have control over.
Right.
And now we're living in a society and a culture that's like, actually polls tell us it's not that distrustful of scientists, but the rhetoric, at least coming out of the White House, is that you should be distrustful of scientists.
Yeah.
Do you find that things have changed recently?
Yes, but that has partly to do with the subject of this book and the fact that I was approaching a number of biotech companies. And I think in general, they are very wary, and they have a model of communications, which is essentially one way. Like, here is a press kit, here is video, here is what we're going to give you to work with. So they're not, as a rule, inviting people to come hang out, which is what I always wanted. I always want to just hang out. I don't know exactly where things are going to go. I just want to spend at least an afternoon there, preferably more like a day. And that is often not okay. In this book, I went all the way to Chengdu, China, to report on xenotransplantation using pig organs, because the two companies here in the United States, eGenesis and United Therapeutics, were very hospitable. Initially, they were familiar with my work, and they said, "Yeah, let's get on a Zoom. Let's bring in the CEO. Let's talk about it." And I thought it went really well. And then one of them ghosted me, and the other one just said, and sometimes I think it's they say let's talk to the legal the legal team, and then at that point I know where things are heading, and I don't blame them. I mean, they, like you said, they have no control over what I'm going to say, what I'm going to focus on, the tone that I'm going to take, what I might see when I'm there, and who I might talk to about it. So of course, there's every reason for them to say no, and I get that. But to answer your question, it has, in that sense, become harder. And I think there's just more concern in general about what's going to get out on social media. What am I exposing myself to?
Yeah.
What's going to be taken out of context from her book or her reporting, and that's going to go online and go viral. And why shouldn't we say no? So yeah, it has gotten harder in that sense. I'm happy to fly to Chengdu, China, and talk to people there, and they were lovely, and they were willing to host me. So there are always workarounds for me, but yes, it's gotten, in general, people knowing who I am has made it easier. For example, I spent time in Kansas City with a man whose wife had been in an iron lung, and from the polio era. And she had recently died, and I actually wanted to try the iron lung. It's a working iron lung. Now, if I had just contacted him out of the blue and he'd never heard of me or known my work, I think it would have seemed kind of creepy. But he was familiar with my work, and he was like, absolutely, come out here. That'd be great. And so that tends to happen, and if somebody's familiar with what I do and they like the books, they'll go to bat for me.
Yeah.
So,
oh gosh.
yeah, and I've had that happen where the researchers had to overrule the public affairs people. That happened in this book at the extracorporeal life support lab, where they were sort of trying to create long life organs for transplant. And the public affairs people eventually just stopped responding to me. And I don't know if they said no or they just ghosted me. But I contacted the researcher. I'm like, it's like, I don't understand what happened here. And he said, look, come out here. It's my lab. We'll talk in my office, and then we'll walk across the hall to the lab, and that's what we're going to do. And I got there and I said, so what happened? Why did they try to block this? And he said, well, because it's animal research, and they have this idea that me, Mary Roach, I'm an animal rights fanatic.
Really?
Because there were animals in my last book, there was wildlife is that why? I mean, but anybody who's got a facility with animals that are being used in research is going to be very, very cautious, and I get that. But that was hilarious.
It's a
Roach,
tough thing to
animal rights
navigate.
fanatic.
Yeah, I worked in an animal lab, and my professor was always very cautious about how we spoke and who we
Yep.
spoke to. I've interviewed people, especially I think about the times when I've interviewed people at like JPL or NASA HQ, where there's like a press person sitting right behind the
Yep.
camera, like nodding vigorously or being like, "We can't use that."
Yes.
It's like, oh God.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, the NASA,
Yeah.
I know, I did a whole Packing for Mars was all based on NASA. Well, also foreign space agencies. But yeah, every phone call and every in-person interview, there was someone from public affairs. Fortunately, as far as I could tell, they were sort of absorbed in catching up on their email and text while it was
Same. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, same thing. They were doing 10 things at once, so they weren't really paying attention.
Yeah, they weren't particularly worried. I mean, if they're familiar with my work, they know it's not some sort of weird expose that I'm chasing.
Right. And I think that's the fear for a lot of these folks, that they're sort of trained in a cover your ass model, and
Yeah,
better safe than sorry. But
sure.
I can imagine that can be frustrating when you're just trying to get to these kernels of I don't know, of humanity. And that's really the
Yep.
thing that comes through with all of your writing. I look back to Stiff, which is the book that I recommend to everybody,
Hmm.
who hasn't read your work, to start with. I myself am a psychologist who works in end of life, and I think between Stiff and some Oliver Sacks work, and then some like Atul Gawanda and a few
Hmm.
other writers, I got really interested in death and in trying to take away the taboo around death, to bring it into the light. And I think what you did so brilliantly in Stiff, and you've repeated it in every book that you've done, which makes me think it's just your personality and your writing style, is you get just up to that line of it being really caustically funny, but you never are exploitative or offensive. It's
Yeah.
always still really respectful of the humanity of whether we're talking about cadavers or whether we're talking about living people who are working in these fields.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that comes from the terror that I had when I wrote Stiff, of getting it right, of being my usual kind of bratty, cavalier, curious self, but also not offending somebody who might have lost a loved one recently,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody in the industry, somebody who I interviewed. I try to put, if I make fun of anybody, it should be me, because often I
Mm.
am the clueless outsider, and so that's a source of, or can be a source of humor. But that was definitely true for Stiff and for Grunt as well. For some of the
Mm.
folks that I interviewed, in the military science realm, they do really heroic, hard stuff. It was a book about keeping people alive, not killing people, and it was, and I would never want to disrespect or offend those folks.
Mhm.
But then on the other hand, things happen that are funny or weird or surreal, and I want to bring that in, because it's how it is. That's life, people,
Absolutely.
or
You
death.
know, yeah, both. Well, you can't have one without the other, can you? And I think about your new book, Replaceable You. It's also about keeping people alive, really. Like, isn't
Yep,
that kind of one of the core
sure.
thesis statement here is I was trying to describe it to some of my friends who haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. Adventures in Human Anatomy is the subtitle, which, yes, the book is all about all these different aspects of human anatomy, and Replaceable You, I think, captures it a little bit better. All the different ways that scientists and biomedical sciences, like, physicians, work to extend, augment, improve the experience for people on this planet who either were born with or unfortunately had some sort of experience that prevented them from having I guess, fully healthy limb or organ or whatever,
Right.
something that would have shortened their lives or would have made their quality of life go down. We live in a very modern time, and there are a lot of really cool things happening to help us live longer, healthier, and more functional, I guess we could say, lives. And you really do your reporting right on that edge, right? It's not so much, oh, this is all the stuff we're already doing. It's a lot of, this is right where we're about to be.
Right.
That's fascinating.
Right, exactly. And it's really, I'm always interested in the human elements of it. It's people tend to think, oh, this is a book about, oh, it's about prosthetic limbs. It's like, no, it's not I'm not writing about the mechanics and the engineering of mechanical body parts. It's more like in the case of prosthetic limbs, the chapter is about elective amputation, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I met this woman who she had a foot that it was a healthy foot in the sense of getting a blood supply and not being compromised in that way, but it was twisted. It didn't enable her to move the way she wanted to hike or run or jump. And she would see people who had a prosthetic foot who were able to do these things, and she wanted it off.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted it cut off, and she couldn't find a surgeon to do that. And it's an elective amputation is what the chapter is about, and it's a really it's an interesting conundrum because there is this bias for wholeness and for hanging on to the pieces that we started out with, even to the point where our lives, are it could be better with something else.
Yeah.
And how do you get somebody to that point, or how does somebody get a surgeon to that point? How do you find a surgeon who's willing to do that, given the worries about liability or phantom pain, or will the person get insurance reimbursement for that? It is a book about these technologies, but it's very much not about the technology completely. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's the people who are involved in it and the challenges, because it's not easy. You tend to see a lot of hype online about, press. It partly comes out of, startups need to get funding, so they tend to kind of overstate what they're doing and what they're going to be
Oh,
able to
yeah.
do. They have to get the funding, and then hopefully they can deliver that. But often it turns out the body's a little more complicated than they thought, or just, you can get there part way, but technology has shifted and now there's a better option. So things are changing all the time. And it makes it challenging for the people who do this work, and now especially challenging given the cuts to funding and the
Mm-hmm.
disruption that causes to someone's career and to the functioning of a lab that's depending on a long-term contract that's already been signed that might be taken away.
And all of the potential outcomes to the prospective patients
Of course.
downstream from that.
Yep.
It's, there were a lot of things that I encountered in this book that, and I consider myself a relatively well-informed, I'm an allied health professional, meaning I'm sort of have one foot in this camp, but I'm not myself a biomedical scientist or a physician. I'm a psychologist who works in a hospital, in a cancer center. And
Yeah.
so I am near to a lot of medical stuff, and I work with patients who are going through a lot of medical stuff.
Yeah.
But my focus is, of course, on their psychological well-being, their quality of life, things like that. And a couple things came up for me as I was reading your book. The one was the parallel that I often see, because I work in end of life quite often, between the decision to elect, for example, for medical aid in dying, versus the decision to die, quote, naturally, which, like, what does that even mean? And I see a lot of parallels with the elective amputation question, this
Mm-hmm.
idea of the person knowing what's best for themselves,
Yep.
but the entire apparatus saying, don't think so. We're going to make it really difficult for you to
Yes.
have those empowered decisions.
Yeah.
And I just kept seeing themes over and over when I was reading about that woman. And the other thing that came up for me, okay, there's two things I learned. Well, I learned a lot, but there are two things that stick out that I learned that I tell everybody. The first one was I had no idea how quickly an individual who has experienced brain death but is on a heart-lung machine, how quickly very bad things start to happen to their body, and how minimal the amount of time that they can stay on heart-lung is before those organs have to be transplanted. I guess I just always assumed
Me too.
Yeah,
I
right?
assumed that if you had the blood pumping through the body, to the organs that you could basically keep someone on there indefinitely.
Because we hear stories about that, right? We hear stories about people in comas, I guess, but they're still alive.
They've
That's
still
the
got
difference.
a functioning, there's still a brain, there's the brain stem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're in a coma. I mean, once you're dead, you're brain dead, you're dead. There's a machine that's taking over the circulation of the blood. But for someone in a coma, the brain is still functioning. And it was so interesting talking to Dr. Bob Bartlett, who's the person who pioneered ECMO, which is the heart-lung machine that keeps people going. In surgery, heart surgery, you can take to sort of work on the heart because you have this machine that's pumping the blood. But he told me this fascinating effect of essentially organs need a brain. They need a functioning brain. So if you have a fetus, he talked about there's an acephalic, a fetus that doesn't have a brain, but the mother's the mother's brain is functioning as the brain, and there's some kind of hormone secreted that is keeping that fetus alive, and once it's delivered, then it dies, and vice versa. If you had a pregnant person who is brain dead, that the fetus would keep those organs viable much longer than they would on a heart-lung type of machine, a ventilator.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
so they're sort of borrowing each other's I mean, of course, we know they do that with nutrition and everything else.
Sure.
But even borrowing the biology of the brain during that pregnancy is, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and he was hypothesizing a hormone that he doesn't know what it is. It's a hypothetical hormone. He's given it a name, Vitalin, and which is in the UK a pet food brand, but who cares about that? Well, it's a hypothetical hormone. It hasn't been discovered, but he believes there's something that the brain is secreting, and the organs need that. Like the heart needs a brain. Which was fascinating, especially when you're talking about this concept of replacing individual parts. The human body is a system. It's a machine, and a lot of interconnections that might not be that well understood, that complicate things. When your goal is to just replace one part, this idea of the body having these sort of invisible threads kind of linking things and depending on things complicates matters.
And that's such an important visualization because, yes, you can't just take out a piece and plug in a new piece and hope. Like, there are situations where the body just sort of makes up for it. And there are other situations where there's like a catastrophic downstream problem from that. I mean, we were talking about what happens when somebody's brain is no longer functioning, but even when their brains are functioning on ECMO, I remember seeing a patient in the hospital where I work who had pretty traumatic injuries, was on ECMO for an extended period of time, and ultimately lost all of his fingers. And it's because just the way that the ECMO machine was working to perfuse all of his tissues to make sure that the blood flow was there, it's just not as good as if your heart and your lungs are working with all the feedback mechanisms that your brain is telling them to do.
Oh, yeah. And in his lab, they were looking at ways to keep organs alive or usable for transplantation longer. And he's talking about those heart in a box systems where you're not just putting the heart on ice, you're perfusing it with blood, you're keeping it nourished. But he said, even then, you get 8-12 hours, because what happens, they push the blood flow through at a pretty high rate, and it starts to damage the valves, and then the valves get leaky, and this whole kind of cascade of deterioration happens. So they were looking at, can we lower the blood flow or use slightly different fluids to protect the valves, keep the heart nourished, but extend it to 24 or 48 hours, which would mean now you can test that heart. You might be able to fix it if there's something wrong there. So that would, increase the number of organs available for transplant. So it's pretty cool what they were doing. But yeah, you just think, well, you got a blood supply, you're good. It's like, well, what's the flow rate? And what's that doing to the walls of the vessels and the valves? And it's just never simple.
No, it's definitely never simple. And I think it is hard to understand that until you've either had a loved one who has undergone an extreme transplantation, like heart is probably the most extreme. It's why, again, working in a hospital, the highest sort of standards for whether or not somebody is I guess approved to be on the transplant list exists for heart.
Yep.
Because somebody has to die in order for a heart to be present,
Yeah.
right? It's different with
Right.
kidney, even liver.
Right.
Sometimes it's different, and so the barriers are much lower for those. But with a heart, like, it's a really big deal, and it's horrifying when you've been working with somebody who's been awaiting a heart, and they finally are told that the heart's coming, and then for whatever reason they don't get it that day, or for whatever reason they do get it and then they reject
Yeah.
it, or there's some sort of problem. It's never easy.
Yeah, and it's frustrating for the people who've been doing work with xenotransplantation using gene-edited pig
Mhm.
hearts. Um, the people that have received one so far, they've been in a position where they're only going to likely live a few more weeks. So they're kind of the last person you'd want to be
Yeah.
experimenting, trying out this new transplant technique. But because of because this hasn't been, the hearts haven't been approved, it's done on a compassionate care exemption. So,
Yeah.
and they live like 2 months, and that sounds horrible, but they were in pretty bad shape to start out with.
Mhm.
So now there is a guy, I think Tim Andrews is his name, and I think he's coming up on 8 months with maybe it's a kidney, not a heart. But anyway,
I mean, that's incredible. But it also
yeah,
it goes to show that sort of human. I think it's twofold, really, because I see this a lot with cancer patients that are nearing end of life. There's the one thing that's like, okay, if there's an option available, I'm going to do it for my family, for myself, for whatever.
yeah,
Especially those who still have the energy and who have not grown as weary of all of the treatments.
right,
I'm going to try. But I think there's this secondary thing, and I saw this when I was doing my dissertation, where I interviewed one person on the last day of his life before he took the MAID drugs, where there's this deep passion for, if I can help somebody, I know that I'm going to die of this disease. I
yeah,
know that this heart or kidney is only going to give me a few extra months, but maybe this research will help somebody else live a lot longer.
right,
And what a beautiful thing to do in your last days, weeks, months.
right, exactly. And that may have been part of why these folks agreed to receive that xenotransplant. They
Right,
must
because
have known
undergoing
that
major surgery is intense in your last.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
when
there
you're
was a
that
hope. Of
sick.
course, there's a hope that in the 2 months that they give them, or whatever they expected it to give them, they might make their way up the list. I mean,
Mhm.
unlikely, and I think those folks were pretty uh, far gone. Seems like the wrong way to
Mhm.
say it, but near to death. That
Yeah.
it probably wasn't a realistic likelihood, but you never know. I mean, at that point, no one knew how long these pig organs would keep working. They
Yep.
started out working pretty well.
Well, and that's the thing too. There will be a point in time where we get there, and where
Yep.
people can live with these animal organs, with these xenotransplants in a reasonable way. And who knows who's going to be the person who is living at that moment when we switch
Right.
over from rejection to non-rejection,
Right. I mean,
when we make some
people, yeah,
huge leap.
right. And people have been living with pig valves for decades. That is to say, the technology and the availability has been there for I don't know how many decades, but so it's not inconceivable that the gene edits will create a heart that won't just be a bridge; it'll actually be a functioning, long-lasting replacement.
Yeah. Not to do a complete left turn, but I mentioned that there are two things that I often bring up to people where I'm like, I had no idea. I mean, I learned so much, but these two are, I just tell them to everybody who will listen. The first one was, what we just talked about. And the second, I think it's because we love confirmation bias, and we love things that reinforce ideologies and ways of thinking that have already been developed, or that continue to develop in our lives. But when I read the chapter where you talk about trans affirming surgery, which this is also just like deeply relevant right now. I mean, our local children's hospital just lost all of their funding here in LA
Yeah.
for their trans affirming, division. because whatever. Well, we're going to put that on the shelf. But the
Yeah.
thing that really stuck with me was this deeply patriarchal male bias where male surgeons were giving trans men penises that were too big.
Yeah.
Penises that they don't like. Not only do I not want to deal with this thing, like wielding it around, it's like, difficult, but also now when I engage in any sort of sexual relations, my partners aren't comfortable. I'm not comfortable. And it's like, ask any woman and they would have been like, uh-huh.
Yes, exactly. And the surgeon who I had dinner with, who's the director of the Cedars-Sinai Transgender Surgery and Health Clinic, he's a hetero male, but he was saying, he said, he gets pushback from other surgeons, and he gets patients who come to him saying, look, like what you just described, this thing is too big to use, and I didn't ask for it. He said sometimes there is a tendency for trans men to ask for something bigger initially. And he said, we always try to involve the partner. If there's a long-term partner, that we also, we encourage them to include this person in the decision. But yeah, he's like, so I've had patients. I mean, I don't know how many. I don't think it's widespread, but he's had patients come to him say, this thing's too big. That the surgeon did this. And he said there was this sense of the surgeon kind of, patting himself on the back. Look what I made.
And the thing is, it does not surprise me in the least.
No, I know. And also talking about trans women, he was saying there's two surgeries. There's vaginoplasty and vulvoplasty. And he's like, if you're going to have problems, it's going to be with the vaginoplasty. So if you're not interested in penetration, if you're not that interested in sex at all, if there may be, it may be just a vulvoplasty is fine. He said, people want to look normal when they look down there. They don't want to look at a penis. They want to look the way they want to look, and we can do that really well. And so let me know. Do you need a vagina? Are you okay with anal sex? Tell me what your life is like and what you want, because that's going to be a little trickier to do. So, you've got to be dilating it. And in the case of the procedure he was talking about, we don't need to get into that, but
like infection risks and things, right? Like a lot
he's talking about it's a sort of a secondary procedure. If the first operation didn't work well, they can use a section of the intestine with its blood supply intact. So there's various things that are related to that can be a little challenging. But anyway.
But yeah, let's not assume that that's what every trans woman is interested in having a sort of near to cis presentation. Like that's not, like there's not one way to be trans.
Right. Penetration isn't everything. So if, it's kind of similar to the way that for many decades, women who had mastectomies, I don't think were regularly told, you could just go flat. You're good. It's far simpler, fewer complications. It's your choice, but this is an option. And you just, that is now, I think, I don't know because I haven't talked to patients or doctors about that, but my sense is there's been enough talk about it online. And also Tig Notaro did that famous monologue, one person show with her top off. And she's a comedian, but it was so brilliant and sort of very courageous monologue. So, I don't get the sense that it was sort of presented as an option for a long time.
It wasn't. And I remember just recently reading, because these are the patients that I work with regularly, so I'm always trying to read things from the perspective of individuals who have sort of been there before. Reading Audre Lorde's book about how traumatic her experience was, where they just sort of came in her room with the full assumption that she was going to want to have surgery, or that she needed to wear a prosthesis, or here are the pads to make them look even. Here are all the, and
Yeah.
she's like, would you want to ask me what I want to do? Like, maybe I want to wear this as a badge of like having gone through this. Maybe I only want
Exactly.
one breast, maybe I don't want a prosthesis.
Yep.
And you don't know until you really talk to somebody. And I think as a mental health professional, I see the outcomes very often of the lack of those kinds of, I mean, that goes back to the medical aid and dying thing too. Even to this day, I see people who never even know that that's an option for them.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's just too, I guess, taboo, or it's the practitioners themselves haven't worked with their own comfort level about these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I in general, our medical system doesn't prioritize good communication. Not just about options, but about the realities of what this is going to be like.
Yeah.
To recover from, say, a double mastectomy. Just tell me the facts and let me make up my mind. Let me decide what I want. Yeah.
I see it all the time with patients who, when I ask them, well, what's your prognosis? They'll say, I'm stage 4. I'm at this place in my treatment. I've had 3 chemos that failed and now I'm on a trial. And I'll say, well, do you know what your prognosis is? And they'll say, oh, my doctor tells me that they don't have a crystal ball. And I'm like, no. No, they have prognostic tools.
They don't have.
You have the right to.
Yeah.
They don't have a crystal ball, but they can plug a bunch of stuff into a calculator and tell you that other people with these different, variables live on average from this time until this time, with and without treatment. But yeah, it's hard. It's a hard thing to talk about, and you do that in your work across your books as you talk about hard things. And as you kind of mentioned before, there's sort of a selection bias in that there's you tend to find people who are willing to talk about those hard things with you, which I absolutely love. Do you find sometimes that you have to break them open a little bit, or do you tend to connect with people who are just like raring to share?
I think that the process kind of self-selects that kind of person, because the kind of person who doesn't want to talk openly about what they do with an outsider is probably just not going to answer my email. And I get a fair number of emails. I would say 40% of the emails I send out don't get a reply.
Yeah.
And part of that is that people don't look at email all the time anymore. But I think it's often that the people who do reply are open and confident and comfortable about what they do and the realities of it. So breaking somebody open, that's rare. Part of it too is I try to spend at least half a day, preferably 1 or 2 days with somebody, and I think that they get a feeling for what I'm trying to do and who I am and all the other thing that I do is I always send a book to someone initially, so they have a sense of what I do. So if they're uncomfortable with the tone and they want to say no, that's fine. But usually I think it is reassuring. Like they see it and they're like, oh, well, I could see myself profiled in this book and that could be fun, good, whatever. So I don't think it's usually not necessary. That over the course of an afternoon or a day or even 2 days, people are fine talking about the nuances and some of the less comfortable aspects of it, I think. And also, I don't know, if you ask somebody in a straightforward way, they tend to answer in a pretty straightforward way, unless, of course, they're in the public affairs office.
What about the flip side of that question? Have you found, because you interview professionals within their field. Sometimes they're, maybe, let's say, a little on the spectrum or in just very like deeply, narrowly focused on, as you mentioned before, one really interesting but kind of obscure thing. But you also very often will profile and interview the people who have the lived experiences, sort of the applied side of the research, like the man whose wife died and who had the iron lung. Has anybody ever opened you up in a way that you didn't expect?
Yeah. Every now and then I I go to talk to someone, and the example that you give an example from this book, which is the man whose wife had been using an iron lung to sleep in for many years and who had recently died, and I was I was reporting about the science was negative pressure breathing versus positive pressure breathing, the kind of ventilators that are in ICUs now versus iron lungs, which is a gentler form of ventilation. It's actually akin to what our bodies do. So I'm kind of caught up in the iron, like how iron lungs work, et cetera. And I show up, and here's this man who is still very much grieving the loss of his wife and really wanted to tell her story in a lot of detail, and actually gave me a printout of some 10 pages about her life and how they met. And so what I thought I was doing had to kind of scoot over and make room for his story. And I think it made the chapter better. It still is, I knew that I wanted to try this iron lung and that would be an interesting and surreal experience, but I wanted to incorporate Mark and Mona into that chapter too. So I think it's great when that happens. There was another time I was reporting for Packing for Mars. I was up on Devon Island, which is up in near the above the Arctic Circle. It's a place where NASA tests suits and vehicles because it's very similar. It's kind of a lunar landscape in one part and Martian looking in another part, and so they can do these simulations. And I was reporting there for a week, and I just was sort of nosing around, and I talked to this man who works on suit design, and I said, "Oh, what are you up to?" And he said, "Well, I design space suits for escape at different altitudes and velocities." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." And I sat there thinking, "Well, maybe I'll do something with this." And then he gave me this. He had given me a mission patch, which is anytime the shuttle would go up, there'd be a mission patch with all the names of the astronauts. And he had given me one for the Columbia. I didn't really think much about it. I said, "Oh, thank you." And while we were talking, I looked at the patch and I saw the last name Clark, and his name was Clark. And I realized that his wife had been on the Columbia when it exploded, and that's why he was so passionate about designing a suit that would enable you to survive if the capsule or the shuttle or whatever it is coming down. And there's a lot of variables that you have to deal with. The atmosphere is very thin, so a parachute would have no air, and you're going super fast, and if there's enough friction, you might burn up, and the suit has to be protective against that. So it's a really tricky thing to do. But now I understand why.
Yeah.
And it was very moving. And he didn't say anything. The fact that he gave me that patch, was his way of saying it without saying it. And I had to decide at that moment, how much do I ask him about it? And anyway, so the whole tenor of the conversation shifted. And that's the kind of thing that I think is always, it's always helpful and always interesting. And I'm always grateful for those moments. I can't make them happen. They just sometimes happen.
And they really do make the writing that much richer. And I can imagine that it's actually, I don't know, I think about all of my colleagues and all of the people I've met throughout my career in psychom and now in psychology who they sort of, I feel like you've got these two extremes and then everything in between where you meet somebody and you're like, "How'd you get into this?" And they're like, "Oh, my professor was working on it and it kind of seemed interesting and I did this project and that's how I got hooked." Or you've got the people who are like, my mom had schizophrenia and she did this and that's why I got really, or like I personally had this like tragedy. And so sometimes they're very close to the work in a way that they don't always describe right away.
Yes, and I think that's true for authors and books as well. And so people always ask, "And how did you get into this?" And I always feel bad because I don't have a good inspiration story. Well, I was born without a kidney, and I ended, I don't have a good body replacement part story that inspired the book. And people invariably expect that an author's coming from a place of personal experience, and often
it's just interesting.
It's just what would I find interesting for 2 years of my life to step, what world do I want to step into that will hold my interest and, keep me curious. And that's usually just how it goes. But yeah, it is always interesting to meet somebody who has that personal connection.
Well, so I think that's a good segue for my last two questions that I really are like burning a hole in my pocket. I think the first one has specifically to do with that. And it's, when you are coming up with these stories, as you are engaging with these stories, how do you decide sort of what is too deep, what's too wonky, what's too in the weeds, what's more palatable? And I guess it's kind of the same question. Like, I think about this show, Talk Nerdy, and I made a decision early on. I'm just going to do what's interesting to me and hope that other people find it interesting too.
Yes.
But the minute that I start trying to like present the show for the audience, and I'm just afraid I'm going to lose my voice. I think about an audience and I know that they're there, but there are definitely times when I get in the weeds about things that nobody cares about except for me. And I'm like, well, deal with it. Okay. That's what I was curious about. How much do you write for the reader? How much do you write for yourself?
Exactly the same as you, what you just said. I can only just go by what I'm curious about and hope that other people will be interested in it too. So I write for an audience that is like a room full of Mary Roaches. It's like that scene in Being John Malkovich where everybody in the restaurant is John Malkovich. That's my audience. I can't do anything else. But for this book, the two chapters that I included that didn't initially scream Mary Roach chapter had to do with induced pluripotent stem cells, so growing things from scratch basically, and also bioprinting, because they're pretty technical and I don't have a background and I didn't really know how to get into it, and so those I put off till the end because and they're in there. Okay, and once I started to learn about them, they are in fact really interesting, but I had a lot of kind of reluctance because it is something, I don't know, it's a little technical. It was, but I knew that this book really, I'd be remiss to not include those chapters in this book.
That's why sometimes it really is why I asked the question, was those two chapters? Because as I'm reading it, as somebody who has knowledge in this area, but also somebody who has done SciComm, I remember thinking like this, there's parts of this that are dense. And I wonder what the experience was like for you slogging through that and being like, okay, the only way to really understand this is to get this background. I think back to Oliver Sacks. He has books like Migraine, which are like unreadable. Like I loved it, but like it's a really intense book. And then he has books like The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. But in all of his books, he has to explain like kind of some really complicated science to get to the good stuff.
Yeah, and for stem cells, I thought choosing a lab that was trying to grow hair, essentially create follicles from scratch, taking blood cells, regressing them to pluripotency, and then instructing them to become the kind of building blocks of a follicle. I thought, hair is pretty Mary Roach, a hair farm. So for me, it was it depended on finding the setting, and it took a while because a lot of places didn't write back. The folks at Stemson Therapeutics, may their company rest in peace.
I remember that.
Yeah, I know. They were great. They were so patient and so enthusiastic, and it was so interesting. It is, it's one of the more complicated chapters, and there is a mistake in there that has to do with transcription factors, and those paragraphs are taken out of the ebook, but they're still in the hardback, which kills me because I'm like, transcription. I don't know what the fuck transcription factors. Like, factor, duh, that should have been a clue. It's not a gene edit, you idiot. So anyway, I'm sure I'll take grief for that. But
from 0.01% of the readers.
Yeah, but enough of them. So, but I ended up really enjoying that chapter, and I feel like it was important to have it in because there's so much confusion and so much misinformation about stem cells. People, getting fat extracted and fractionated and then just like put back in their knee or whatever. There's a lot
Oh
of
God, yeah, people
there's
flying
a
down to
lot of
Mexico, getting stem cell
yeah, a
treatments
lot of
for
these
cancer.
stem
Ooh.
bucks is what one researcher called them. Stem bucks.
Mm.
They're like Starbucks, these clinics,
Mm.
and that's completely different from what's going on in a place like Stemson Therapeutics or some of these firms that are working on creating dopamine producing neurons for Parkinson's, say, or islet cells for diabetics. So there's really good work and very promising and far along
Mm-hmm.
work that will be helpful for Parkinson's patients and diabetes patients. But that's different than all of the kind of like, we're just going to inject these stem cells in here and see what happens.
Hope for the best.
Hope
Yeah.
for the best, and that'll be $5,000 or what, So I thought it was important to help people make that distinction because I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it is super. I mean, it's like a public service announcement, to be honest, because there's a lot of danger around these sort of quote unquote clinics.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious here right at the end. I say I've checked off all the questions that I had. I didn't write anything down, but like all the questions that came up for me, I feel like I've hit them. There's always a million more things to ask, but when it comes specifically to Replaceable You, or just to kind of where you are in your career, in your writing, is there anything that we didn't touch on? Like, is there anything that you want sort of the listeners to know about the book that we didn't get to?
No, I guess I would just want people to know that it's, the same. I'm very, very dedicated to keeping the books fun to read. I want them to be entertaining. They still have all the absurd footnotes, and it's
I
this.
love the
It's
footnotes.
another Mary Roach escapade, even though occasionally it gets a little technical.
I have to say I love reading out loud. My partner and I will read to each other at night before we go to sleep, and often we'll read out loud, especially when a book is really compelling. And one of my favorite things when I was reading this book out loud was kind of being like, okay, wait, there's another footnote. hang on. I have to tell you this little random aside. It's so much fun. I had completely forgotten how great your footnotes are. So thanks for reminding me
Oh,
about
sure,
that.
sure. Yeah. They're a lot of fun for me too.
And your voice is so easy to read out loud too. Some books flow, some books do not. I've always found that your books are just as alive when I read them in my own internal voice as they are when I read them out loud. And so it's just so fun to engage. Like everyone listening, I highly recommend, if you haven't read any Mary Roach, get the whole catalog, but you can start with Replaceable You. Do a book club around this. I think it's great book club material because each chapter really is its own story, and that's pretty typical with your books. There's an anthology feel, but they all connect to one another. So you can, at night before you go to sleep, read a chapter and literally put it down until the next night when you pick it up for a new chapter. You'll be excited to keep going, but you'll also feel like you'll feel accomplished because you completed, an entire idea within that chapter. And that's a good feeling, to feel accomplished about your reading.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Thank you so much. That's like, well said. Thanks. I did not provide that script, people.
No, it's true. I'm speaking from the heart, I promise. Well, Mary, I can't thank you enough, not just for, taking an hour out of your day to chat with us, but also just for taking all the time out of your busy life to do the incredible work that you do, to share these really important stories, not just of the outcomes of this research, but also the stories of the people who are tirelessly working on the front lines, very often with little funding and with a lack of public understanding of the work that they do. Like, a lot of scientists are working in a very thankless way lately.
Yeah.
And I think that you continue to do such a beautiful job of humanizing these people and their work and bringing it into the light and into the public consciousness. And so I'm just really grateful for all that you do.
Oh, thank you. Well, you as well. You do a lot of that yourself. And, podcasts are a way that people really love to take in information now. So it's so important to have smart, experienced, but also super engaging providers like yourself. So, pat
Oh,
yourself on the back too.
Stop. I'm going to cry. So everybody listening, the book is Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy by Mary Roach. And thank you for coming back, everybody, week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.